And most of the people that worked there did not know that I had any sort of vision impairment or anything like that. And at that time, I was not comfortable walking around with my cane.
Job Insights, a podcast to help you carve out your career pathway and enhance the opportunities for gainful employment.
Because an interview is not just the employer figuring out if they want to hire you, it's you figuring out if you want to work for the employer as well.
To help you navigate the employment world and give you job insights and enhance the opportunities to choose the career you want. Selling yourself. You want to be the best box of cereal on the shelf, because when people come down, they're looking at all the colors, all the things. What makes them pick a certain box? Is it the toy inside? Is it the fancy colors? So you have to start selling yourself and be the one they pick.
If you have more of a obvious disability, you want to make sure that you kind of address that in a way that makes it so that they're not thinking about that, they're thinking about your skills. That's what their inner monologue isn't about you. It's about what they think that you can't do and their bias.
You can find the Job Insights podcast on blindabilities.com, part of the Blind Abilities Network, with hosts Serina, Gilbert, and myself, Jeff Thompson. And you can contact us by email at jobinsights@blindabilities.com. Leave us some feedback or suggest some topics that we cover on Twitter at JobInsightsVIP. And check out the Job Insights support group on Facebook, where you can learn, share, advise, and interact with the Job Insights community.
I didn't catch them off guard by showing up with a cane, and I found that approach worked really well for me.
Learn about resources for training, education, and employment opportunities.
I think sighted people, just like since video calls exist, that's what they use. So it's definitely it's going to be a type of interview that most people will have, I think.
And now please welcome Serina, Gilbert, and Jeff Thompson with Job Insights. Hey, Serina.
Hey, Jeff.
To disclose or not to disclose? That is the question I ask of thee.
Have you been reading Shakespeare?
No, but I have been reading the Job Insights support group page. There's been a topic going on there about disclosure.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people have some different opinions on, do I talk about my disability in the job interview? Do I not?
I have a very visible disability in that I use a cane and I can't make eye contact. And so I find that usually, and this is the same thing that I did after the phone interview, but before the in-person interview, I disclose.
Do I talk about it when I'm doing my cover letter or my resume or not?
If you're applying for a position and it involves using some kind of accommodation, then it's probably wise to disclose it.
And I really wanted to see if we could talk about that a little bit today, get some different opinions.
If I need to, then I do. If I don't need to, I don't.
Just get it all out there. I know this will be a pretty divisive topic. Everyone has some pretty strong opinions on disability disclosure. We're here to offer you some tips on what might help you in the job interview process, when might be a good time to disclose and work to your advantage in a job interview, and maybe when might not be a great time to bring that up in a job interview.
And when to know the difference. That's, I think, the most important thing. Because
exactly.
Some of the topics that came up really shocked me. Like, I do my own accommodations, a gentleman said, and that just made me cock my head. And I had to think about that for a little bit. And yeah, I get that. Or someone says, how dare you, can you show up and shock them by showing up with a cane? You didn't tell them. And I'm thinking, like, in some situations, the resume does not have a spot for that. You know, they may be able to dissect it out of some of the positions you've held or some of the companies you worked for, but I think mostly it's one of those situations that you're prepared for either way.
Well, and it's interesting that you brought up I provide my own accommodations piece of the equation. I respect anyone who wants to step up and say, here's what I need. I already have it. That's great. But in a lot of systems, you can't install your own programs onto computers without having some significant permission. For example, I work for a government agency. There's no way they're going to give me an administrative password and all kinds of leeway to install any programs that I want, because who knows what they could do to their network. Of course, I know that JAWS is safe, and I know that they know that JAWS is safe, but they still have to have some sort of system for managing the programs that are on their server and on their network. Because what if you install a pirated piece of software? Then what? Not saying that you would. Most employers, unless it's a real small company, it is their legal responsibility to provide you with that reasonable accommodation. So why not take them up on it as opposed to using your hard-earned money to purchase those licenses and keep that up on somebody else's computer?
So having JAWS, having accommodations, and talking to them about accommodations, that to read the screen. You can even have a person come in to do an evaluation of what kind of software they're using, what kind of databases they're using, to see if you can gain access. And further down the line, some scripts could even be made to help these specialized programs that they utilize, so you can overcome that hurdle. And it might be just a button that you have to get past.
Exactly.
So there's some great services that are out there when you're trying to get a job, especially when you're into the job field. It seems like State Services has a whole arsenal of people that'll help at that point, or if you're trying to retain a job too.
That's a really good point. Yes, if you maybe already have a job. Gosh, I didn't even think about that, Jeff. If you already are working, I've seen that in quite a few of the support groups on Facebook. I'm working, I'm losing my vision, I don't think I can work anymore. And just remember that if you are having vision difficulties at work, you are still able to go apply for services at Vocational Rehabilitation and see what kinds of things they might be able to put in place so that you can keep your job. I'd hate to see somebody that has 20 or 25 years in a career and you're just that close to retirement and feeling like you have to give up because your vision is changing with all of the technology that's out there now. Not saying it's going to be easy. There's going to be some learning curves for sure. But the sooner you start getting those services, the sooner you can get back to working in the job like you used to.
Yeah. And that job retention, I'm not going to say it's a lot easier, but what it does is you're going to go into some specifics. You're just going to do this, to bridge that, to shore up what you're not able to do, because it's obvious right away. Rather than if you leave the job, you go back home, then you got to start from scratch. Like, I want to learn how to cook. So it's interesting at different points when people are losing their vision. But when we're talking about disclosure, that's a unique point too. I suppose because I've been blind for so long that to me, I can live within my skin. And I think the difference is people who are trying to, especially high partials or partials, they're either around blind people, they're the sighted person, around sighted people, they're the blind guy or the blind person. But at a job interview, there's a quandary there. Do they use their cane or not use their cane, bump into things, or do they bring their cane?
You just brought up a really interesting point, because I just thought back to when I was 19 and I started getting cane training from Vocational Rehabilitation. And at that time, I was a cashier at a retail store. And most of the people that worked there did not know that I had any sort of vision impairment or anything like that. And at that time, I was not comfortable walking around with my cane. I'd rather bump into somebody than be seen as the blind girl. So at the age of 19, I would have absolutely said, no way, I am not disclosing my disability. I can do it just as well as anyone else. I will just work twice as hard and struggle at times. But now, 20 years later-ish, I think totally differently. I could never personally see an instance where I would not want to disclose that, because I don't want it to be the elephant in the room when I'm being interviewed.
It's really up to the individual. Some people like to not say a thing, show up to the interview, surprise, I'm blind. Granted, they don't say that. I think to the interviewer that's a surprise. But if you want to go that route, that's totally fine. That's entirely up to you. But I want you to think about something. When you go in for that interview, blindness is the white elephant in the room. If you don't address it, you're left to whatever conceptions they have of blindness, positive or negative. But if you address it as in a positive way, you bring up the fact that you are blind and that you utilize accessible technology via, whether it's JAWS or NVDA or system access, whatever it is you use, explain to that employer why you're the best candidate for the job. The long answer is it's up to the individual, but if you don't address the fact that you're blind, I think it puts you at a disadvantage.
And that was Rob Hobson. He's the director of programs at Blind Incorporated in Minnesota. And that's what it is. It's the elephant in the room. And if you don't squash that, they're going to paint their own picture as big as an elephant any way they want to.
Well, the reality is that every employer knows that they can't come out and say, what's your disability? They can ask, do you require any reasonable accommodations to perform the essential duties of this job? Which is a roundabout way of still figuring it out, obviously. But if you're coming to an interview and you're using a service animal or you have a cane, it's right out there. And then they're just wondering, well, how on earth is she going to be able to do this? Or how is he going to be able to spell check documents for me or access the computer? Because the technology that we use is not mainstream. Most people don't even understand what a screen reader is unless they know somebody who has a visual impairment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the point where you have the opportunity to educate them and sell yourself with the skills that you do have.
Exactly. One of the other panelists did bring up a really good point. If it's a phone interview, that's totally different. They don't see you. They have no clue what you look like, what your abilities and capabilities are, other than what you're selling to them. I don't think I would mention it in that interview type of setting. What about you, Jeff?
No, I really don't think so. I think the phone call is a situation where they're just trying to get a good feel of how your social skills. They want to find out if you're a good fit for the team, for the company.
Correct, because we talked about this a little bit on our very first podcast. If you got the interview, then they have already determined that you're qualified for the position. They're just trying to see if you're a good fit for the office, whether that be the culture or some more specific questions that they weren't able to flush out in the application process. By not discussing your disability when you have a visible disability, you're almost causing the employers to only focus on the fact that you just walked in with a service dog or with your cane. And as human as people want to be and as empathetic and understanding as they claim to be, that's still going to be in the forefront of their mind, especially if they're not familiar with your disability.
That's where Daisha, the employment specialist, brought up a very good point about what you're just talking about. And she called it the internal monologue that the hiring person will be creating.
When you do talk to somebody, especially if it's an interview, you're going to get that, tell me about yourself. You could even get that when you just meet an employer at a job fair or an internship fair. Tell me about yourself. We want to make sure, especially if you have more of a obvious disability, you want to make sure that you kind of address that in a way that makes it so that they're not thinking about that. They're thinking about your skills. A lot of people make the mistake of never saying anything, and then an employer, the whole time that they're talking, is thinking, well, because they don't have any experience with vision loss, so they're thinking to themselves, I don't know that I could do that if I couldn't see right. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to do that. That's what their inner monologue isn't about you. It's about what they think that you can't do and their bias. Tell how you do things. Go into it with confidence. Know what your skills are ahead of time. Know what you have to offer an employer, and just go into it that way.
Exactly. They start putting those doubts in their mind. I don't know if they'll be able to do this. What about safety concerns? That's a really big one. Is my workers' compensation insurance going to go up because I have this individual in my office who's presumably, whether correct or incorrect, going to be causing more workplace incidents or accidents, which we all know if you've gotten your orientation and mobility training and your personal adjustment training, you're probably more safe than the people who are sighted in the office because you're not walking around on your cell phone or distracted.
We'll have to put in ramps and handrails. We'll have to label everything. And yeah, but you can control that. And I think at that point, you know you're coming in with a cane and you know they don't know it yet. So that's your opportunity right there. That's your opportunity to call out the white elephant in the room in your favor. You can address it and you can tell them exactly like we said, selling yourself. You want to be the best box of cereal on the shelf because when people come down, they're looking at all the colors, all the thing. What makes them pick a certain box? Is it the toy inside? Is it the fancy colors? So you have to start selling yourself and be the one they pick.
It's interesting that you mentioned when you come to the interview, let's say with your cane or your service animal. I have seen situations where individuals do have a visual impairment that warrants the use of a cane, and they opt to not bring that to the job interview. And I have seen that cause some problems because when you don't have your cane or your service animal, that could create some super awkward situations when you're trying to interview with the employer. As an example, the employer comes out to the lobby to get you, and maybe your vision's not adjusted or whatever the case may be to that particular office environment, and you're walking not so steady or unsure about yourself. Just think of the assumptions that they're putting in their mind now with the individual that's interviewing for the job, but not walking appropriately in their office or not making eye contact or not quite getting the handshake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very important because myself, I have no central vision and I can pick up some peripheral stuff, but in an interview, you're probably trying to make the best eye contact you can. And I was just in an interview. This was a podcast interview, and I told the person right off the get-go, don't think I'm looking over your shoulder or something behind you, because that's how I sometimes pick things up, by looking away from what I'm really looking at. So I actually made them feel more comfortable than them trying to talk during the interview, wondering what's behind me he keeps looking at, or something like that.
Yeah.
And in reality, I couldn't, whatever I'm looking at, I can't see anyways. So you can control the situation. They're going to start working this white elephant up in the room. They're going to start, and not even hearing what you're talking about, all the stuff you're talking about. So you have to get control of the conversation a little bit. And that's where you can start saying that, how you overcome doing job details that they want, like Word document that you use because you use JAWS, or how you can use other type of apparatuses or tools for success that get you to the point where you can compete against anybody that they hire.
I say no, because I feel like with as much misunderstanding as there is in the world with blindness, it's easy for a employer or potential employer to look at your resume and see that you're blind, and see all these other resumes that he's got to go through that are just as educated, just as qualified as you are, and to simply just let that one go. Like, all right, I'm not going to deal with that. I mean, because you're talking about them having to deal with ADA and all that other kind of stuff. Walk in there confident and stuff. Don't disclose before you go in, and just be like, hey, this is what I can offer your company. If you made it in there, if they invited you in, then that means you're qualified, and you should have a shot at it just as everybody else.
You're listening to the voice of Miranda Brandenburg. She's a certified personal trainer and nutritional specialist.
The vast majority of people out there have never dealt with a blind person or encountered someone, especially one that is out there making waves, that's out there leading the charge, that's out there willing to work and get in there and travel and do this and do that and get out on the mat and fight and compete with sighted peers on every single level that they can.
And it doesn't have to be the first thing you talk about. You know, it can be something that, because I've never been in an interview that didn't say at the end, do you have any other information you'd like to offer me? Or do you have any questions for me? I don't, what about you, Jeff? I've never not been asked that.
Every time. And have that question, because they want to know something. So I suggest before you go into an interview, go online, read their mission statement, see what company they are, see what they're all about, what's their key words. And that's something that you might want to integrate into your dialogue with them. And then when they come with that question, ask that question. Like, do you have any questions about my ability to do this job?
And the way that I've approached it, I've only had to do it once, because one was I was applying for a county job at a local workforce center. And the second interview was using a white cane, was at the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. So could not be more of a comfortable environment. So I didn't even have to address it there. But the first one, I did come in, I had my white cane. Towards the end, they said, do you have any more information you'd like to share with me? And I said, well, you know, you obviously know I have a visual impairment. I just wanted to give you some information on the technology that I use in order to get things done. And I had gone as far as to print out some real short tip sheets on, at that time, I was using a portable CCTV and JAWS, so that they knew I had already thought about the types of things that I might need on the job and was already skilled in that, so that they didn't have to worry about, okay, obviously I'm going to have to train her on our procedures, but is she also going to have to get training on her technology needs?
Mm-hmm. And that's a good point, to come in there and let them know how you're going to access the material that they have.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have seen some questions in our support group about, do I disclose in the application process? A lot of applications are automated, and some of them do ask if you have a disability. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because yes, they might be asking if you have a disability, but unless they're breaking the law, that information is not to be passed on to the hiring manager or the individual that's reviewing your application. Typically, when they're asking if you have a disability or require a reasonable accommodation, that information is used for one of two things. The first would be that there is a program called Work Opportunity Tax Credit, which allows employers to have taxes reimbursed to them to offset hiring expenses and things like that for hiring individuals in a variety of situations, including those that have a disability, as well as those that are on public assistance. Or they're using it because they know that they have some sort of testing that all the applicants have to do, and they really truly are trying to reasonably accommodate anybody that might need those accommodations. So I wouldn't hesitate to answer that personally, because that could put you in an awkward situation down the road should you have to take, for example, if you're applying at a call center, should you have to take one of their tests and all of a sudden sudden you're asking for an accommodation when on the application you said that you don't need accommodations or don't have a disability.
And the same thing in Minnesota. Our governor passed 2 years ago, he passed the proclamation that 7% of all employees in the state jobs, they'll hire people with disabilities to fill that 7% goal that they want to have. And so in some applications, some situations, there is a checkbox for that. And that way, companies that do want to hire people can have that choice too.
And that brings up another good point. The federal government also has a mandate that they have to hire a certain percentage of individuals with disabilities. And in fact, if anyone has been through that federal hiring process, it's a nightmare to say the least. If you do not check that you have a disability, then you're not going to be considered in any of the priority categories, which means that your application might never even get looked at for an open position.
Yeah, it's a tough area. And a lot of us, like I said on the last podcast, a lot of us aren't fully up on everything that there is to know about blindness when you probably, if you weren't born blind or you just became blind, there's a lot to learn. And there's lots of people that are offering suggestions and no one's really wrong. But I think the best fit is a best fit that you feel most comfortable with, because if you're uncomfortable, they'll know you're uncomfortable with it. So that's why in Minnesota here at the state agency, they do tutoring on job interviews, mock interviews, where you do get the situation that, you know, Mr. Boss might ask questions or make you feel awkward in a sense, just so you can understand that every interview that you go to, you're going to get a different person that has different preconceived ideas, and it's going to be a different situation each time. So if you have an opportunity to try a mock interview, that'd be a really great experience.
Well, and frankly, I remember reading an article, I think it was last year, people are actually scared of blindness. They would rather have cancer than be diagnosed with being blind or visually impaired. So imagine that fear then being put into the situation of, oh my gosh, how could I possibly hire somebody that has this visual impairment if you don't address how you do things in the workplace?
That's a great point. Another great point is to remember, they want to hire someone who can get the job done. Bottom line, get the job done. Susan Robinson, an entrepreneur out in New York and a TEDx speaker and visually impaired, by the way, she told me that she has never terminated a person because they were sighted.
That's an interesting way to put that.
She has a job that she needs to get done. She wants to hire the person that can come in and do that job. That's it.
Wow. Look at you getting all philosophical over there.
To me, it was no different than anyone else doing the same thing, with the exception of letting people know during an interview process what I might need from them. So again, it was the same sort of self-advocacy, to use your wonderful term, as I did in college. So in an interview process, the first interview is just sort of getting to know each other. Do I think I'll like working for this person? Because an interview is not just the employer figuring out if they want to hire you. It's you figuring out if you want to work for the employer as well. Once we got to maybe a level 2 or level 3 conversation in the interview process, at that point, when it seemed to be a little bit more concrete that the position possibly could be mine, I would disclose and I would say, I just want to let you know, I have a visual impairment. It may not be obvious to you, but what that means is I'm going to bring everything that we've already talked about, all of the skills and characteristics that we've discussed, but I am going to need a large monitor for my computer so that I can see things, enlarged a little bit. And generally people were very receptive to that because, again, I'm letting them know, which is what every potential employer wants to know. Can you do the job? Are you willing to do the job? And are you going to be a good fit?
Serina, when we had our conversation with Cindy Bennett, a researcher out in Washington and a former intern at Microsoft, she mentioned something that we hadn't even considered, and that was an interview via video conference.
I think if I had a video interview, I would probably disclose, but I would frame it something like, I'm actually blind, so I might be like, hey, does the camera look okay? Okay, cool. Like, just like that, just really quick. I do practice if I do a video interview. I always, first of all, clean my apartment and look nice. But second of all, I set up my computer on a table in front of my couch and call someone I know, like a video call with someone I know, and they tell me, okay, this is good. I've found that just like a quick little thing at the beginning of the video interview, I'm like, oh, by the way, I'm blind. I just want to make sure that you can see me okay in the camera. If it's an old-fashioned audio phone interview, then usually the person emails me and says, we'd like to invite you for an in-person interview, and I say thank you and confirm the dates and say, oh, just for your information, I'm blind. Here's what I need.
Were you excited when we asked for a podcast that you didn't have to clean your house?
Yeah, my house is a mess right now. I don't want to do video calls late. I think they are important things to think about. Like, I honestly, with a lot of my colleagues, now that I'm comfortable with them, I'm just like, oh, can we just do audio? Because then I can just set my phone down beside me and we can go on with our business. But I think sighted people, just like since video calls exist, that's what they use. So it's definitely it's going to be a type of interview that most people will have, I think.
I honestly didn't even think about how the video interview, how that would be impacted by visual impairment. So I'm glad you brought that up because I haven't had an interview for a job since 2010. And it was definitely not when people were doing video interviews or anything like that. Yeah. So that's definitely something to think about.
It's really great that so many people came on board and shared their experiences, the way they handled disclosing a disability during an interview, and the people leaving comments on Job Insights support group page on Facebook. And to sum it up, here's Rachel Hastings. She just got done running the marathon, the Boston Marathon, and she's a music therapist.
I've done it both ways. So I've done it one time. I didn't tell them that I was blind until I got there. And I think it kind of caught them off guard. I mean, part of me is like, deal with it. But the other part of me is like, well, you know, there's no harm in telling them over the phone after they invite you to an interview. And so because I kind of felt like I made it awkward, so the next time I was first offered a phone interview and I told them over the phone, I'm like, by the way, I want to let you guys know that I'm legally blind, but I'm very independent. And that was after they invited me for an in-person interview. So it's like there was no way they could turn me down, but yet I didn't catch them off guard by showing up with a cane in person. And I found that approach worked really well for me.
So Serina, next week we're going to be talking about some apps for the workplace, apps for productivity, apps for a school.
Yep. I know that I have my favorites.
You're going to save them? You're going to make us wonder till next week, aren't you?
You guys will have to wonder till next week.
The cliffhanger strikes again.
So I'd like to thank everyone for listening to our show today. As always, if you have any questions or topics that you'd like us to follow, you can give us a message on Twitter. That's at Job Insights VIP, or on our Facebook page, which is Job Insights. And we also have a brand new Job Insights support group on Facebook. Just search Job Insights Support Group. See you next time.
Thank you, Chichow, for your beautiful music. That's El Chichow on Twitter. We really hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thanks for listening, and until next time, bye-bye.
When we share
what we see
through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap between
the limited expectations and the reality
of blind abilities.
The realities of blind
abilities.
For more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities. Download our app from the App Store, blindabilities, that's 2 words, or send us an email at info@blindabilities.com. Thanks for listening.